All right, lesson 53 here. The pot of oil and the Shunamite son. Please turn in your Bibles here to 2 Kings, if you haven't already, chapter 4. 2 Kings. Chapter 4, we left off yesterday where last lesson, where Elisha did 3 wonders to show that God already, right away, had given Elisha power. He healed that spring of water that was no good. He called out 2 she-bears to kill those wicked children who were mocking God. And he also helped the armies of Israel, and Judah, and Edom defeat the Moabites by having them dig trenches and making the water through the Lord look as though it was blood. Today, too, we'll see another miracle that Elisha participates in. Okay? Now, in this situation, as we go through them here, we don't necessarily know. Elisha ruled for a long time. You've got your chart there of the kings and the prophets. Elisha rules for about 55 years. We can't touch on everything that Elisha did on that time. So we're going to pull out some different things. They may have happened, this one may have happened 10 years after this one. It's not like it happened one day right after the other. But the idea here is that we see how God is working in Elisha and also teaching us. Here we are thousands of years later, and the Lord is still teaching us through these wonders that He did. Okay? So these wonders are more kind of wonders done in private today. 2 Kings chapter 4, starting here at verse 1. Now there cried a certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets unto Elisha, saying, Thy servant, my husband, is dead, and thou knowest that thy servant did fear the Lord. And the creditor is come unto him my 2 sons to be bondmen. And Elisha said unto her, What shall I do for thee? Tell me, what hast thou in thy house? And she said, Thy handmaid hath not anything in thy house, save a pot of oil. Then he said, Go, borrow thee vessels abroad of all thy neighbors, even empty vessels, borrow not a few. And when thou art come in, thou shalt shut the door upon thee and upon thy sons, and shalt pour out into all those vessels, and thou shalt set aside that which is full. So she went from him, and shut the door upon her, and upon her sons, who brought the vessels to her. And she poured out. And it came to pass, when the vessels were full, that she said unto her son, Bring me yet a vessel. And he said unto her, There is not a vessel more. And the oil stayed. Then she came and told the man of God, and he said, Go, sell the oil, and pay thy debt, and live thou and thy children of the rest. If we remember Elijah, before he left, he visited schools of prophets, where men were being trained to be teachers, preachers of God's Word. And that's where we run into this woman. This woman was married to a man. They had 2 sons. Unfortunately, her husband died, leaving her as a widow with her 2 sons. And she's also left with his debts. So anything that he had purchased or traded or bartered or borrowed with or for, she has to pay that back. Those are the debts that she owes here. And so, one way in the Bible times that was allowed to pay those debts, if one did not have money, one could give away one's children. Here, my children will serve you for a time, and they'll do the work that you want them to do. And when the payment then is finally equally made, so after many years, after they've worked long enough so that they've worked for you to pay off this debt, then they're free to go. So this woman, this widow, who after losing her husband just wants to probably have a family that she could love, her 2 sons, a reflection of their father, she would be devastated to lose them. And so she goes to the school of prophets here, and specifically to Elisha, and she tells them of their situation. Now, one thing to think about here is, what if that was you? What if you were the man who had lended money, or was the creditor who had given some money? you said to someone, yes, I'll give you $1,000 or $2,000, or I'll let you borrow this. What would you do if the person who borrowed it from you, their family, had a tragedy where the husband died? So the mother is at home taking care of the children, but there's no one to take any income, and they owe you some money. You trusted them. You gave up something that was yours that you would like to have back. It's going to hurt you not to get it back. But as a godly creditor, what should we do? Well, I would say in this case, the godly creditor probably shouldn't have taken her sons away, but could have said, slowly, over time, maybe pay me back. And even have forgiven her maybe a good portion of it because an understanding of her situation. That's what a godly creditor would have done. But obviously this creditor here is probably not a very godly man. So, all she had left in her house, which Elisha asks, he says, what do you have left? Well, I just got this little bit of oil. Remember, even in the times of Jesus, right? Those precious ointments and oils that were rubbed onto the feet and onto the face and everywhere else to give a nice sweet smell, to clean off the dust, to soften up the skin. Oil, this type of oil, was a treasure in those days. Just put it away. Cutting up boxes in our Bible. So, that was a great blessing to have that, but there's only a small amount. So she might be able to get a little bit of money, but it's not going to pay her whole debt. She's still going to. So she laments this to Elisha. And he gives her great wisdom. Well, why don't you do this? Go to your home, go out to your neighbors, and see if you can borrow some pots for a time from them. Which would make you think, well, you're going to go even further into debt. But borrow some empty pots from all your neighbors, and then bring them into your house. Close the door so that no one can see. It's done in private. And take that small vessel of oil and begin to pour it into some of the bigger ones. And keep doing it. Keep doing it until you've filled all of the vessels. So the woman, it looks like, sends her sons out. And they go and they gather all these vessels and pots and pans and bring them into the house. And they close the door. And you wonder what was in the mind of this woman. Did she really believe? She must have. She must have really believed. She must have really trusted that this was the way the Lord would provide for her. So she took that small vessel filled with oil and began to pour it into a smaller... Maybe she thought, I'll start with a small pot first. We don't know what she was thinking. That's not the case. She trusted. She begins to pour in a small pot or a large pot, and it fills up. And she goes into the other one. Pretty soon she just begins to sit there and probably tells one son, you take this full pot away and bring it over here, and tells her other son, you keep bringing me the empty pots. And she keeps pouring and pouring until finally she says, son, you're falling behind. Bring me the last pot. And he says, mother, there are no more pots. They're all full. Now she's got a house full of pots filled with precious, expensive oils that will go for a good price out on the market. So now she goes back to Elisha and says, what shall I do? And he says, take those pots of oil, bring it to the market, sell it to whoever you need to sell it to, get the money that you need from the oil, go and pay the creditor his debt so that he will leave you alone, and then there will still be a little left that you can sell, and that will be a way that God will provide for your family. Without a husband to provide for you, you can care for your children and stay home, and God will provide for you. And that's exactly what happens. Okay? So they do it in the privacy of their own home, because then, like we said, some of these miracles that Elisha is going to have happen will be ones that are done privately. So God provides our daily needs. That's something that we can definitely recognize here. God provides our needs. We need to learn to trust in Him to provide our needs, just like this widow did. Great trust she had. Now we meet another woman, different from this woman. Please follow along here in 2 Kings chapter 4, starting at verse 8. And it fell on a day that Elisha passed to Shunem, where was a great woman, and she constrained him to eat bread. And so it was that as oft as he passed by, he turned in thither to eat bread. And she said unto her husband, Behold now, I perceive that this is an holy man of God, which passeth by us continually. Let us make a little chamber, I pray thee, on the wall, and let us set for him there a bed, and a table, and a stool, and a candlestick. And it shall be, when he cometh to us, that he shall turn in thither. And it fell on a day that he came thither, and he turned into the chamber, and lay here. And he called to Gehazi his servant, Call this Shunamite. And when he had called her, she stood before him. And he said unto him, Say now unto her, Behold, thou hast been careful for us with all this care. What is to be done for thee? Wouldest thou be spoken for to the king, or to the captain of the host? And she answered, I dwell among mine own people. And he said, What then is to be done for her? And Gehazi answered, Verily, she hath no child, and her husband is old. And he said, Call her. And when he had called her, she stood in the door. And he said, About this season, according to the time of life, thou shalt embrace a son. And she said, Nay, my lord, thou man of God, do not lie unto thy handmaid. And the woman conceived and bare a son at that season that Elisha had said unto her, according to the time of life. And when the child was grown, it fell on a day that he went out to his father to the reapers. And he said unto his father, My head, my head. And he said to a lad, Carry him to his mother. And when he had taken him and brought him into his mother, he sat on her knees till noon, and then died. And she went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God, and shut the door upon him, and went out. And she called unto her husband, and said, Send me, I pray thee, one of the young men, and one of the asses, that I may run to the man of God, and come again. And he said, Wherefore wilt thou go to him today? It is neither new moon nor Sabbath. And she said, It shall be well. Then she saddled an ass, and said to her servant, Drive and go forward. Slack not thy riding for me, except I bid thee. So, this woman here in Shunam, it's a bit in the northern part of the land, she is called a great woman by the Bible. It may have been, maybe she was a wealthy woman. It could have been that she was a godly leader of women. Could be both. But she understood who Elisha was, a special man, and she called him, she welcomed him to her house because he was an important person. She, being considerate, being unselfish, gave good attention to Elisha and made sure that she took care of him. In fact, so much so that we probably assume that she was wealthy for her ability to be able to do this. But off of the side of the house, she employed some men to build a special private room. And in it, she put a bed. In it, she put a candle. She basically furnished the room with the necessities that he would need, so that he could come in his journeys going through this land. She knew that he would be going back and forth. Whenever he was passing through, if he needed a place to lie his head and rest, he wouldn't have to pay money for the inn or beg his way around or sleep out on the streets. No, he knew that he could come to this house. The doorway was to the exterior, so he wouldn't even bother the inhabitants of the house. He could go in privately, close the door, lay down on his bed, get some sleep, do some work, meditate, study there, and all of those things. What a blessing. What an example for us of how we ought to treat our visitors. Now, Elisha, wanting to show appreciation to this woman for what she did, he speaks through his servant Gehazi. What can I do for her? Can I go to the king and give a favorable report to her so that she will look good in front of the king? Or maybe should I go to the captain and give a favorable report to the captain so that he will say, yes, this woman, I'll help her out in her time of need. Nay, says the woman, I don't need any of those things. But Gehazi knows. He says, Master, I know what she really wants, what she longs for daily. She's an older woman, and her husband is old, and they've been without child. She'd really like to have a child in her old age. So Elisha calls her in. And he tells her, at this time of the season next year, now you will be holding a babe in your arms. And she says, Nay, my Lord, don't lie to me. Don't get my excitement up. I've been praying for this my whole life. The Lord has not given it to me. Don't fool with me now. Me and my husband are old. We know it can't happen. But it was a miracle. And a year from that day, it came true. She held a child in her arms. Just like Abraham and Sarah, we can imagine. This child was a child of wonder, a miracle baby. Well, the story goes on. We don't know, again, a passage of time happens because the young baby grows up into a young man, a young boy. One day he wants to go visit his father out in the field. His father is watching over probably his fields, and he's watching his workers, and son says, I'd like to go out there. Well, the son goes out there, and when he arrives at his father, he begins to complain, "Father, my head, my head." He begins to probably experience a severe headache, what we would call heat stroke. Okay? Being out in the sun for too long, especially when you're young, not having enough water, having traveled a great distance, no protection, more than likely he's suffering from heat stroke. Well, heat stroke is nothing to be messed with. Heat stroke is something that can kill very quickly once it starts to take over your body. Your body will heat up, and very quickly it becomes hard, almost impossible for the doctors to bring your temperature down. And you can die very quickly without the aid of cooling measures very quickly. And so this young lad is sickly out in the field. His father gives the son to a servant and says, "Bring him home to his mother now." And the servant brings him home to his mother. And the mother, probably sitting on some type of furniture, sits down and lies her child on her lap. And he dies there. So she sadly takes him and puts him onto the bed of Elisha in that separate room, the special room, and she closes the door. She closes the door. And she did not tell her husband. That's what's interesting here. When she goes out the field, she asks for permission for her husband. "Can I have an ass? Can I have a servant? Let us go." And her husband kind of scratches, "Well, it's not the time of year that you normally go or do these things. Don't matter. Just trust me. Just let me go." So she doesn't tell him that the son has died. Maybe she's afraid of worrying him, or maybe she's afraid of something that he would do. We don't know. But she doesn't trouble her husband. Maybe she's because of her great faith. She trusts that the Lord will raise her son back up, and her husband needs not even worry about this. She doesn't want to bother his mind. But she was in a hurry to get to Elisha. Well, let's see what happens when she gets to Elisha. Verse 25. Okay, we left off at 24. Please follow along here at verse 25. "So she went and came unto the man of God to Mount Carmel. And it came to pass, when the man of God saw her afar off, that he said to Gehazi his servant, Behold, yonder is that Shunamite. Run now, I pray thee, to meet her, and say unto her, Is it well with thee? Is it well with thy husband? Is it well with thy child? And she answered, It is well. And when she came to the man of God to the hill, she caught him by the feet. But Gehazi came near to thrust her away. And the man of God said, Let her alone, for her soul is vexed within her, and the Lord hath not hid it from me, and hath not told me. Then she said, Did I desire a son of my Lord? Did I not say, Do not deceive me? Then he said to Gehazi, Gird up thy loins, and take my staff in thy hand, and go thy way. And if thou meet any man, salute him not. And if any salute thee, answer him not again. And lay my staff upon the face of the child. And the mother of the child said, As the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, I will not leave thee. And he arose and followed her. And Gehazi passed on before them, and laid the staff upon the face of the child. But there was neither voice nor hearing. Wherefore he went again to meet him, and told him, saying, The child is not awaked. And when Elisha was come into the house, behold, the child was dead, and lay upon his bed. And he went in therefore, and shut the door upon them twain, and prayed unto the Lord. And he went up, and lay upon the child, and put his mouth upon his mouth, and his eyes upon his eyes, and his hands upon his hands. And he stretched himself upon the child, and the flesh of the child waxed warm. Then he returned, and walked in the house to and fro, and went up, and stretched himself upon him. And the child sneezed 7 times, and the child opened his eyes. And he called Gehazi, and said, Call this Shunamite. So he called her, and when he was come unto him, he said, Take up thy son. Then she went in, and fell at his feet, and bowed herself to the ground, and took up her son, and went out. So, we have a few things in here. She begins to approach where Gehazi and Elisha are, and they recognize that's the Shunamite woman. So Elisha says to Gehazi, Why don't you go out and meet her ahead of time? And Gehazi gets to the woman and says, Well, how are you? How's your husband? How's your son? How's things going? All is well, she says. So Gehazi and the woman continue on, but when she arrives at Elisha, she falls down at his feet. Why she didn't tell Gehazi, we don't know, but she had her trust and her faith in Elisha, in the God of Elisha, to do this. And so she goes down, and she doesn't, and Gehazi's trying to pull her away, and what are you doing? And leave my master alone. And Elisha says, No, Gehazi, I know what's in her heart. The Lord has told me. She is troubled. She is vexed. Her son is no more. So, Elisha says to Gehazi, I want you to run ahead. And if any man, in other words, if on your way, if men invite you into their house, say no. Don't salute any man. Don't stop anywhere. Make a beeline for her house. And when you get to the home, here, take my rod, my staff, and lay it on the face of the child. Well, that may have made Gehazi think, will this staff bring him back to life? Or maybe the mother thinking, that's what we needed to do. The staff of the Lord. The power is in the staff. So Gehazi runs ahead, and he lays the staff on the young boy's face. And he looks, and he notices, and nothing happens. So Gehazi closes the door and returns and meets the woman, the Shunamite woman, and Elisha approach, and he says, "No, nothing has happened, my Lord." Elisha says, "Oh, of course not." And what does he do? Elisha clears them out of the room, no one else to be near, and he closes the door. Okay? Again, in private, this miracle happens, behind a closed door. And Elisha goes and lays on the child. He puts his mouth on the child's mouth, his eyes on his eyes, his hands on his hands. The boy's body became warm. Now, that's kind of odd. He's died probably of a heat stroke, which would be the overheating of the body. They wouldn't have had air conditioning in those days, so it's not like the body in the house would have probably cooled down all that much. It would have been a warm room. Again, it shows you how God is in control of all things. This boy's body needs to be warm. So Elisha lays out on him and warms the body of the boy. And the boy awakes and sneezes 7 times. Elisha then has the joyous task of leading the boy out to his mother. And what joy, what weeping there must have been by her. And then her husband can come in and she can probably tell him what happened. And her husband doesn't have to fret about it, but they are both thankful to the man of God, to Elisha. And we can be sure Elisha did not take the credit for himself, but he said, "Nay, nay, woman and man, it is all the power of the Lord by what just happened. It wasn't me, it wasn't my rod, you saw that. It is all from the Lord." So, it is the word of God here that now through Elisha, but also we have seen through Elijah, these miracles have worked. Okay? They have no power. It's all the power of God. When Jesus raised people from the dead, He will be able to do it He is God Himself. But Elisha and Elijah must call on the Lord. That's a big difference. They must call on the Lord to do it. And the apostles will have that too. They can't just say, "Stand up, rise, and walk," and they're fixed. But they will have to say, "In the name of Jesus, do this." Okay? And that's what we see here too. It's no power of themselves. They need God to do this. And so that's an important reminder for us too. God, we can't do anything on our own. It must all be done through the power of the Lord. Okay? God is the God who gives life. He's given each of you and me our lives. He will take our lives away, our earthly lives away at some time. But that's the beauty of it, that God has created us in that way to give us life. So we can be thankful for that. There's some good lessons for us to learn here about hospitality, and again, about how God sometimes works in private, not out in front of everybody, as we have seen. And 2, that we can trust in God. Trust in Him to supply our needs. God will take care of us.